Good morning, everyone, and welcome along to the Blood Red Morning Bulletin, your place every weekday from 10 a.m. for the latest Liverpool FC news and transfer rumours. And what a 24 hours it has been. It's been probably the craziest, busiest few days in the summer transfer window so far. I know it's very early days in that summer transfer window, but wow, we've got a lot to talk about today. You join me, Patrick Smith, as I host alongside Liverpool.com's James Martin. James, how's things?
Yeah, just trying to wrap my head around the development. It's like you say, it's been a bit of a whirlwind, but yeah, we'll dive into all of that shortly. I'm doing as well as can be expected in the circumstances.
Yeah, very, very busy day for everyone at Echo Towers yesterday. I mean, the dust settled, doesn't it, I suppose, over the last 24 hours. I mean, yesterday was very reactionary, emotional at times. So we've got a day to reflect on it. Let's get back into it, shall we? So yes, of course, if you've been living under a rock, the news is that Al Ittihad are apparently approaching Liverpool with a £40 million offer for Fabinho. We'll start with Fabinho, move on to Henderson. The Daily Mail reporting as well that the Reds anticipate an offer from the Saudi League, but Fabrizio Romano is reporting that no negotiations have taken place. That's how things stand at the moment. James, what's your take on it? 24 hours later, the dust settled, as I said. Have you got a different stance on Fabinho, or are you, tempted by the offer?
It is a tricky one, isn't it? I can see why the club would be tempted because, I mean, you're looking at, a good 5 years of elite service from him now. Last season, there were question marks over him. And a club has come to the table. Opening offer would, see Liverpool, I think, slightly more than make their money back in terms of the original transfer outlay when we got him off Monaco. So, you can see the logic. You can see why, even if we weren't planning to do anything with Fabinho, that offer comes in and it maybe turns a few heads. But it's so unlike how Liverpool operate. They usually lay out these plans so far in advance. And so if they haven't been looking for a starting number 6, and now they have to start that search, midway through the window, not quite midway, but much later in the window than you would normally associate with Liverpool. I mean, all their business was done by this time last year comfortably. A couple of weeks back that time last year. So yeah, I think it's there has to be a point where Liverpool goes, this is too good to turn down. But
yeah. Is that 40 million?
I'm not sure if it is. I'm not sure if it is because it's just it's so difficult because it's more than anyone would have envisaged Liverpool getting for him at this point in his career. But at the same time, you have to look at his importance to the team rather than just objectively to the market, because you do have to basically rip up the midfield and start again if Fabinho goes as well. I mean, he's been fundamental to the system for so long. Obviously, that system has changed a little bit with Trent Alexander-Arnold coming in next to him. And yeah, it's a gamble if you keep him because you are gambling on him refinding some of those levels. And that's not guaranteed. We may be looking back at the end of the season if we do keep him and thinking we really should have taken that 40 million. That is a possibility that the club would have to contend with if they decided to try and keep hold of him. But at the same time, you'd have to look at what it would leave Liverpool to do in the transfer market. That's what I keep coming back to. And is 40 million enough to do that even? Possibly not if we're talking about basically trying to replicate prime Fabinho. There aren't that many number 6s out there who can fit that bill. So yeah, it really is a difficult one, and one I don't think anyone was anticipating. So I could understand whatever the club did, but if I had to come down one way or the other, I'd say need to hold out for a bit more money than that, really.
Yeah, I mean, it's such an interesting one because with Henderson, I mean, obviously there's a lot more issues to it, and people are very night on day whether they want to stay or leave. But with Fabinho, it is a tricky one, as you say, because there were times last season on these podcasts when we talk about Fabinho, and when he was in his biggest slump, the most of it was maybe the discussion, if we could sell him to maybe a Juventus, a Serie A club somewhere in La Liga, whereas Saudi Arabia have come out of nowhere now offering probably more than we'd have expected for it. So it's sort of an unknown entity. But my stance on Fabinho, I think, as you say there, it's such a out there really aren't that many players available at the moment. I mean, you look at Declan Rice, he looks like he's going to Arsenal. Rodri wouldn't sign. Tchouameni's at Real Madrid just signed. Enzo Fernandez just signed for Chelsea. I mean, the only one really is Moises Caicedo, who's going to cost, around 100 million now. Is he the man you'd maybe be looking for, James? I mean, would they really break the bank and go for Caicedo, or do you think that would be a risk to replace Fabinho with?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think they would. I think he's too expensive. And then I
Yeah,
think if we did go for him, that would raise even more questions, really, in terms of why were we out of the Bellingham race? Because
yeah,
that was a similar price tag. Of course, I don't want to keep on circling back around to Bellingham. It's gone, it's in the past, but it would raise that question again. Um, and even Caicedo, he's excellent, but is he the same mould of player as Fabinho? I don't think he is really. How much has he played as that kind of lone number six in the same way? Certainly not the kind of lighthouse figure that obviously Klopp has referred to
yeah.
Fabinho as, that kind of anchor. It's not the same role, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. We're seeing this Liverpool team evolving, and maybe there's a way that it evolves with a different type of number six. Maybe someone who plays in more of a double pivot if Trent's role is permanent. It's a possibility, and there's probably ways of doing that on a bit more of a budget as well. I mean, we've had links to Manu Kone earlier in the window. He's still kind of a number 8, but he's in that sort of 6/8 mold rather than the 8/10. So
Yeah,
maybe there's a thinking in the club that there's something that can work. Fabinho goes, you bank a decent fee, and then you sort of move on from that whole kind of iconic way of playing that has sort of defined Liverpool over the last few years. Because I mean, like I say, that move is happening anyway, and it's all a bit up in the air what it's going to look like moving forward. So maybe that's the thinking. It's a new era. Fabinho is maybe the figurehead of the old era, and if you can bank that fee, then maybe you don't need a direct replacement. You need someone who, like I
different.
say, can maybe play in a two. And there are slightly more options out there who fit that brief. So yeah, I mean, I'm talking myself in circles here because it's just
It is difficult, though. Yeah,
yeah,
I
it's
mean, sorry, go on,
no,
James.
yeah, it's just I was just going to say there doesn't seem to me to be a right or wrong answer for the club. I could completely understand whichever way it went.
That's the thing with this one; it does go in circles. Because my initial reaction yesterday, instinctively, was, "Yeah, snap your hand off. I'll take the 40 million. Take that and run." But then you look at the market; it's a very shallow market for defensive midfielders. I personally am not convinced by Romeo Lavia. I've done a bit of research and looking into him to try and form an opinion. I know it's not reliable looking through YouTube and Twitter and stuff, but I'm not entirely convinced that he was the player to sign anyway, let alone the player you're signing if Fabinho's leaving and he's going to probably become your starting number 6. I mean, I really wouldn't take that risk. And then you look at the names, I mean, there's really not many options. I mean, Moises Caicedo are upwards of 80, 90 million. I'm really not sure that that's the man you should be buying. It's a big gamble spending that much on a player who's still relatively unproven. I know he's been brilliant for Brighton, and the fact he's this engine, this battler would be great for Jurgen Klopp's side, but I'm not sure as a number 6 in that Liverpool system he'd necessarily work, especially for that money. Anyway, let's move on. And I'm sure the Fabinho one will continue to go in circles over the next week or so. It's interesting to see because Liverpool, I believe, are heading off to their pre-season camp in Germany today. So it'll be interesting to see if Henderson and Fabinho are even on the plane, which you presume they will be. Anyway, let's move on to Jordan Henderson, shall we? So the Echo understands that Liverpool are yet to be contacted by any club in Saudi Arabia. So that's what the Echo is reporting. Apparently, there's been no bids, there's no talks. They're all rumours as it stands. But of course, lots of the publications, James, reporting that Steven Gerrard's Al Ettifaq are going to make a bid for him. I mean, what's your take on this one? Because obviously, as I said at the top of the show, there's a lot more issues attached to this one than the Fabinho transfer, isn't there?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I suppose yes and no in the sense that we're already looking at a kind of revolution in the number 8 department this summer that was already on the cards. So I suppose you could look at Henderson and say, well, it changes the picture, but maybe not quite as drastically as losing the one senior number 6 at the club. So I suppose in one sense you could say Fabinho is the more kind of seismic development, but on the other hand, you're obviously looking at the club captain in a summer where the vice captain's already gone. You have to ask questions about sort of the leadership void and as well as sort of dressing room stuff. Whatever you thought of how Henderson did last season, the fact is he racked up an awful lot of minutes. He was one of Klopp's most trusted players even last season. People can have their opinions on that, and I tend to agree that he was definitely a long way off his best, and there were times when he maybe left us a bit too exposed. And you look at the players who've come in, particularly Szoboszlai, and you're thinking he's probably slated for that right-sided number 8 slot where Henderson never quite looked at home. So in terms of even if he stays at the club, I think the plan was to reduce his minutes this season. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's a no-brainer to let him go by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, he's been, again, a fundamental part of the success we've had. But yeah, I think in terms of on the pitch, I probably think Fabinho leaving would have more of an impact, but I'd be far more sort of upset if Henderson were to take the offer. I mean, I think because of how he's conducted himself off the pitch, he's been exemplary as a captain. He's been a leader. He's been almost the leader of the leaders. We saw him take the lead in like the pandemic with other club captains on sort of initiatives around that time. And of course, the big one is of course his work with the Rainbow Laces campaign, things like that. And so he has sort of set himself up to be held to a higher standard. Maybe. I mean, I'm not thrilled about any of Liverpool's players choosing to go over there, to be completely blunt. But yeah, in terms of Henderson, to make that move to a country where there's no two ways about it, homosexuality is illegal, and so for someone to have been such an outspoken kind of advocate for those kind of issues, and then to make that move, it would be really disappointing from that side of things. And I think that's a fair enough point to raise.
Yeah, really well said, James. But I could not agree more. He's been such an amazing ambassador for the club. He's done so much, as you say, with his work tackling homophobia with Rainbow Laces. He's done so much for gay Liverpool fans, gay communities in football. Then to move to a country where you can be stoned to death for being gay as it's illegal. I mean, it's baffling, James. On a personal level that he'd consider that. But then you talk about on the pitch. On the pitch, it makes absolute sense, I think, to sell a 33-year-old Jordan Henderson if you can get some cash for him and take him off the wage bill. But then just on that, James, I mean, obviously the talk is you take the fees for Fabinho, you take the fee for Henderson. But an entire midfield rebuild. Now, lots of our viewers and commenters throughout the season have said we need a full midfield change, rebuild it completely, scrap everyone, bring new faces in. I personally think that if you're getting rid of 5 or 6 faces, including the club captain, the vice captain, Fabinho, potentially Thiago, is that surely not a recipe for disaster, James? Or do you think maybe this new era needs to start at some point?
Yeah, I think it would be less than ideal, put it that way. I mean, the club can't control when the money gets put on the table for these players, and obviously Saudi Arabia's rise as a footballing power to throw the money around has come from absolutely nowhere. So, in that sense, you can maybe understand that these are assets that maybe wouldn't have been monetized or able to be monetized even last summer. So, it's to some extent it's out of the club's control. But yeah, I mean, they can decide whether or not to sell at the end of the day. And I think you're right. I think that there's rebuilds and then there's ripping out the entire midfield and starting from scratch. It does seem like there needs to be some kind of experienced figure in there to sort of guide the new blood. I mean, if we're talking about Fabinho going and Henderson going, and I mean, even Thiago's been linked away recently. I mean, Barcelona has been mentioned sort of tentatively with him. So, I mean, I don't think all 3 of those would happen, but theoretically, if it did, we'd be looking at the midfield from the start of last season, and it would be Curtis Jones and Harvey Elliott. They would be the only ones left. I mean, Bajcetic as well, but he wasn't in the senior picture at that stage. So, it seems like at the very least it would be a massive risk, and I think even that is understating it. I think it would probably be a pretty straightforward mistake. I don't think that's a recipe for doing well. At the very least, we'd be looking at another rebuilding year, so to speak, and I don't think anyone wants to write off another season in that manner. So, yeah, it seems a bit drastic for me.
That's the thing, just on that point there, James. I mean, no one wants another rebuild summer, but they're not in the Champions League. I think we all, not without wanting to kill ourselves, I don't think Liverpool are going to be in a title race this season. They very well may surprise us and, play like they did a couple of seasons ago. They've got every capability and possibility to do so. But is there not a case for maybe having a complete rebuild again this season and then for next season, qualify for the Champions League, go again, push on all fronts?
I mean, potentially, but I suppose what you'd sort of come back to is the kind of the great teams of the past they have had that kind of evolution rather than revolution. I suppose you've seen kind of quality players added gradually, and the stalwarts of the team slowly phased out. I suppose the big question mark around that is, have Liverpool left it too late for that? We've obviously seen the drop off last season, so we can't really build from that position of strength anymore. So maybe we're in uncharted waters, and that is the case, that we do just need to, like you say, just accept that this will be another rebuilding year, ready to get right back to the top. the following season. But I think that would be hard to stomach for fans when
Yeah.
you look at the squad at the moment, and there are still so many players who not very long ago won everything, and so it does seem a little premature to say, right, you're all sort of beyond your utility to this club. We need to start again. And I think the most likely scenario if that happens would be that backfiring. So it's not for me.
Yeah, I agree as well. I mean, it would completely shatter the spine of the team as well if you particularly replace the entire midfield. Let's say they had a midfield playing of Lavia, McAllister, and Szoboszlai. That's not exactly a very solid midfield when they're in the, for want of a better word, running in the mud in a tough game, so like a Brentford away, and you need to turn to maybe Jordan Henderson and Jason Milner in those sort of matches. You need that leadership in there. So I'd be very surprised if both of these players go, to be honest. I think Fabinho probably is the more likely, but as we said, on the pitch. Yeah, there's so many issues. I'm going to keep going in circles with this. And so is everyone else. There's already a Blood Red podcast out, everyone, if you're watching this. It's available wherever you get your podcasts from. And, of course, on our Blood Red YouTube channel, Joe Remo, Paul Gorst, and Theo Squires going through all of this. Really brilliant stuff from them. And, of course, we've got Analysing Anfield as well, coming out today on Friday, a day later than usual, with the brilliant Josh Williams and Mo Stewart going over this as well. So make sure you keep up with all those podcasts. But, James, let's finish off, shall we, with another transfer rumour, a bit of a lighter one to finish on. It is Kelleher. So according to the Daily Mail again, he's apparently emerged as a target for Wolves. So Wolves look to be selling Jose Sarr. Well, they don't want to, but Nottingham Forest want to buy Jose Sarr from Wolves. And apparently Kelleher is going to be their backup replacement option, fee valued around £20 million. What are you saying to this transfer then, James?
Yeah, I mean, I think this was always going to get going at some point, the sort of goalkeeper merry-go-round. There's a lot of clubs looking for goalkeepers, and it was always likely to trigger some kind of chain reaction. I didn't necessarily expect Jose Sarr to be the one who sort of set it off, but I think Kelleher was always likely to attract some interest from somewhere this summer from someone who'd been made to sell their first choice goalkeeper. So yeah, it's going to be a tricky one to navigate. Obviously we don't know what he's thinking, but you'd have to imagine he wants to play more regularly than he has been. His national team manager has been vocal in saying that he needs to play to sort of have that spot in the island side, which is going to be a factor inevitably. So yeah, I mean, if Liverpool can keep him, then great, let's do that. They're not going to find a better number two. It's as simple as that. Klopp said it a couple of seasons ago, I think, that for the way we play, he's the best number two in the world, and I'd be inclined to agree. Stylistically, he's just like a mini Alisson, isn't he? I mean, he sweeps probably even more aggressively than Alisson, but he's so comfortable outside of his box. He's comfortable with his feet. He's also a good shot stopper. If anyone did get him, they'd be getting an excellent goalkeeper. It would be a gamble in the sense that he's not been hugely tested. There's no massive sample sizes on offer, but yeah, I mean, I rate him massively. It would be a real shame to lose him, but I wouldn't be surprised if he wanted to leave. And if he does, if we can get a good fee, I imagine the club would probably let that happen.
Yeah, I agree. If we can get 20 million upwards for him, I'd be taking that, as much as I love Kelleher. And he is the best number two goalkeeper in the world. It's true what you say about him being unproven, because the matches he's played for Liverpool have been very emotional, cup ties. He's often played, the early rounds with the Baby Reds when, Anfield's really up for the game, right behind them. It's very emotional, lots of, crazy, keeper sweeping moments from him, some big saves. He's not actually had like a consistent, apart from obviously playing youth matches, a consistent period of starting matches, getting some consistency as a goalkeeper. So it'd be interesting to see how he actually goes on, because he's got every potential to become a very, very top-level goalkeeper, but he could also be the classic player who leaves Liverpool and then sort of starts to bomb in their career, as we've seen happen with loads of players. But yeah, I'm sure there'll be plenty more Kelleher rumours throughout the summer as loads of teams look for goalkeepers, as you said. But yeah, we'll wrap the show up there, everyone. It's been a bit of a longer one today. Obviously, so much to talk through. As I said, make sure you catch the latest Blood Red podcast out on whichever platform you get your podcast from, as well as YouTube, and Analysing Anfield going out later today. And of course, keep up to date with all the articles and written content on Liverpool.com from our brilliant writers like James, and of course the Liverpool Echo site and socials. So yeah, the Blood Red Morning Bulletin will come back next week. It's every weekday at 10 a.m. So we'll catch you again next week.